Hello and welcome to the podcast. You may or may not be aware that it looks like there may be a U-turn in terms of the winter fuel payments to those in the population, or some of those in the population who are actually vulnerable. And I really had to gather my thoughts and particularly my emotions about this, because I think that this U-turn, whether it happens or not, tells us much more about this party, and in particular about this leader, than many other things do that may at first glance seem more emblematic of some of the flaws that many of us can see before us. There's something about this particular change or potential change in terms of policy, if I could call it that, that deeply irritates me, deeply upsets me, and makes me even more worried about this Prime Minister and this party. Let me begin by taking you to a slideshow, and I'm going to talk about a couple of notes that have been written in terms of how this is being viewed, this U-turn. But before we get there, let us have a look at this short, well, an exchange which was longer, but I have shortened this short clip from an exchange between Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer.
We heard his earlier answer on winter fuel. Let's try and get some more information. I'm going to ask him a simple question. It only requires one word, yes or no. Is he planning to U-turn on winter fuel cuts?
Yeah. Yes. Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I made clear in my earlier answer that as the economy improves, we want to take measures that will impact on people's lives, and therefore we will look at the threshold, but that will have to be part of a fiscal event. But Mr. Speaker, they lost control of every element of the economy, of prisons, the borders, the NHS, you name it. And now she's lost control of her party. They are sliding into oblivion.
They're sliding into oblivion. Wow. Look in the mirror, my friend. And this stock record that we seem to be left with, where politicians generally, and of course I'm talking here specifically about the Prime Minister, cannot seem to answer questions directly. It's a ludicrous set of circumstances, and I do believe that this is something we need to speak to whoever we all have around us who may have some input to Parliament. It just beggars belief. I've said that before. The fact that we cannot get straight answers, and we've become inured and just said, oh, well, that's just the way it is. Well, enough. No, people have had enough of the way things were done and are pretty jaded with politics and politicians. So not only do we need a fresh type of leader to be encouraged and promoted and hopefully voted into place, not just a PM, but in many different other areas in politics, in government, but also in business and communities. We need different leaders to, not all, but many of the ones that we have. And so I think that has to change. And of course, there's no answer. And what is he doing? Well, he's doing the usual old trope of let's roll out what we can say about you. Let's just talk about your failings and shortcomings. We're all pretty much aware of those, Keir. And this is a pantomime. It is literally that. This is performance art. It is a performative debate, because it isn't a debate because it's all about point scoring. Keir's not alone. And whilst there is some good to be had, of course, in some of these exchanges, but I've got to say, in terms of our democracy, do these debates really get us anywhere? Sometimes they do, but when A PM can evade a question. I just constantly, consistently, I despair. That has to change. So anyway, let's then, from this article by Kate Devlin, look at a couple of snippets. Sir Keir may have told MPs the major step is because the economy is beginning to improve, the major step being the potential U-turn. So the UK can now afford it. I don't think it can, funnily enough. But we have to. We can't afford not to. But this should have been done in the first place. I'll come back to that. And it is true that recent economic news might give the Treasury more wiggle room on the issue. We'll come back to that as well. But there is no doubt that the Prime Minister and the Labour front bench have come under intense pressure, to find a solution, since the cuts to the allowance played a key role in the party's recent disastrous local election results. Worth bearing in mind, folks in Labour and Keir, is not only that, and your behaviour around this, even with this potential U-turn, I think it speaks volumes, but I'll get on to that soon. So, wriggle room, yeah, maybe, should have been done before. And this recent drubbing is probably, I think, more the reason that there is this change. Labour has been spooked by, I think that's meant to be the vote, which saw Nigel Farage's Reform Party take more than 500 council seats across England and win a Westminster by-election in what had previously been a safe Labour seat in Runcorn and Helsby. But an attempt to take the fight to Mr Farage with a crackdown on immigration led to a furious backlash for the Labour leader. His own MPs joined trade unions and charities in comparing his language with that of the far right and Enoch Powell after he claimed that the UK risks becoming an island of strangers. And as I said before, what I'm not pointing out here is whether what Keir said about immigration was right or wrong, and whether it was like Enoch Powell, and actually whether the framing of Enoch Powell is right or wrong. Those are whole other discussions. What I'm hoping to point out here is the fact that he suddenly changed. He changed his stance. He seemed to change his beliefs. He seemed to change his values almost overnight after that drubbing. And now we have this U-turn. So let's then just get rid of the slide and come back there. So there's much more. There were more slides, but I'm just deciding in the moment. I think we've seen enough to get the gist of what is being suggested. It's being suggested that it's because Labour has been tough, making the tough decisions, making those tough choices, that now, because of how great they've been, they're able to, well, to help the vulnerable. What a lot of nonsense. What a lot of utter nonsense, Keir et al. I've said it before, and I'll probably say it again. People are not stupid. They are watching. They're looking at this, not only a performative pantomime, but a farce. This is not the way you lead. Leaders who are competent, who are great leaders, tend to have a set of values, a set of beliefs, which, whilst they can be adjusted and updated, they don't want to be blinkered, but they tend to stick by them. And what then happens is you understand what that leader represents. You look at them and say, well, I might not agree, but I understand what they represent. Keir has always appeared to be malleable. The man in the shadows. Nobody knew what he represented. It's what made people uneasy. It's why their intuition, and one of the reasons their intuition was firing off alarm bells everywhere. Because he was chameleon-like, is chameleon-like, just being expedient in the moment to wriggle around and get where he wants to get to. That is despicable. My grandfather, I can tell you what he would have said to you, Keir. A man of action, by the way, a miner, and what a lot of his colleagues would be saying to you. Utter travesty. Nothing like Labour at all. I think I know what you're like, but maybe we'll talk about that another day. I'll stick to this topic and subject right now. So what we have is in my opinion, this drubbing at the local elections and the party scrabbling around to do something different. So Keir suddenly takes his apparent set of beliefs and values, throws them out the window, and then says, hey, today, Matthew, I'm Nigel Farage. It's pathetic. How could you trust anyone like that? As I say, a good leader, a great leader, has the values, they have their beliefs, and even if you disagree with them, you have to admire the fact that they stick to them. You have to admire the fact that they're thick-skinned, they persevere, they take a lot of abuse. Most people, unfortunately, in public life do, or a lot of people do, but they stick with it. And there's one thing that we can then look at them and say, well, I don't agree with your ideology, but I have to admire your tenacity and the fact that you've kept absolutely consistent straight down the line. And there's an honesty to that. There's an authenticity to that. There's an integrity to that. But we're not seeing, in my opinion, integrity or honesty here. Because how can we consider this individual to be honest when he can just change in a moment? To do what? To stay in power. Not only for his party to stay in power for as long as possible, but of course, more acutely, for him to stay in power. Because goodness knows what's been going on behind the scenes. There have probably been people saying, hey, look, what you need to do is you need to turn some things around really quickly. Don't think Keir was listening. But then, oh, right, okay, let's find a way to do something about one of the most contentious issues, the pensioners. By the way, there are more contentious issues than that. But let's just do that. So we'll make that about turn. And that to me is an issue. Oh, of course, by the way, I should say, in terms of immigration, there'd be a lot of people in his party, there have been a lot of people in his party saying, what on earth are you doing? Who are you? Yeah, hello, we were trying to tell you that a while ago. Who is this guy in the shadows? Who is this guy that's so weather vane? Who is this guy that changes at the drop of a hat? Or the sight and sound, perhaps, of more power and prestige? Or hanging on to it for a little bit longer? And so, in my opinion, to summarise, we are seeing someone who's made two about-turns, U-turns, because he wants to survive. Now, I could be charitable and say he wants his party to survive, and okay, I'll say that, but that's only because without his party, he cannot remotely survive. And so behind the scenes, and I've said it, I've called out to some people in Labour before, and I suspect some of those messages have been getting through, not just from me, I hasten to add, from an awful lot of people to say, you've got to do something in your party, you've got to do something about this. So if we look then at a leader who has said, well, okay, immigration, this is what I believe now. Winter fuel payments, this is what I believe now. But here's the kicker, right at the core of this, and I've also said this before more than once, in terms of good leadership, great leadership, a great leader, a person who's comfortable in their own skin, who relates to other people, who has empathy, is also able to say, I am sorry, I made mistakes. I didn't get that right. We didn't get that right as a party. We had 14 years to lounge about and take some free gifts. And Keir, you had a few years of that as well. And so we should have been ready to head straight out of the traps and come up with some great things, which sounded Labour-like, to understand where the pressure points were in the nation where the pain was. But you didn't do that at all. Or at least if you did, there wasn't much of it. You came out of the traps and said, well, we've decided, we didn't tell you this stuff, that we're going to do this, 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 and this. And by the way, the things that we said that we would do, those promises that we said we would keep, because that's how people took them, well, we don't actually have to keep them. It's in the rule book, you see, just like not having to answer a question. Another thing that has to change, by the way. So we're not going to do that, and we're going to do this. And you're just going to like it because we know what we're doing and we're smarter than you. And you just have to put up with it because we've got an awful lot of seats. And we've got 4 years, well, it was then, to play with. And there's nobody else in sight until reform began to get some of its act together. Some. And now, all of a sudden, all that's changed. And so what I'm getting at here is that we did not see a party who had prepared. We didn't see a party who, in my opinion, by any stretch of the imagination, acted in a way that was remotely Labour-like, of old. They didn't act like that. They did some things which were absolutely contrary, attempted to blame it on this multi-billion pound black hole, when we heard indeed Diane Abbott herself saying, no, part of that was because of the political decisions that were made. Now this is gaslighting, and enough is enough. People can see it now. It is a pantomime, it is a farce, and it's also been a tragedy for this country. So, Labour, again, people in influence, you need to do something about this because it's quite pathetic. You're not aligning, as far as I understand it, with your own values. You're flip-flopping around. You're essentially saying, to stay in power, we'll do whatever it takes. No scruples, no morals, no values, no ethics. Not good at all. And I think you've blown it. I think you've blown it by the immigration speech, irrespective of whether people agree with you or not. That, again, is not the point. And you've blown it now with this potential U-turn, because right in the middle of it, I think what we're seeing is we are seeing a situation where this U-turn has to be made because you have made the economy better. It cannot be made because you are actually sorry and you are able to say you screwed up, you didn't tune in, and you actually did not have that perspective on the nation and what they would think would be an important issue, protecting the vulnerable, the weak and the vulnerable. So you're not doing it for that. No, you're not doing it for that because you never thought about it in the first place, and you're not able, even if you didn't think about it in the first place, to apologise, to admit you were wrong and say with some humility, which would go a long way, by the way, that, yeah, I screwed up. It wasn't right. I should have thought of that. That was really silly. It won't happen again. Instead, the only way you're going to make this so-called U-turn is by saying it's because we made the economy better. It's just disgusting. And as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't hold water if it ever did. You've turned out to be exactly, no, maybe even worse than a lot of people thought you would be. It is astounding, and not in a good way. So, Labour, back to you again. What are you going to do about this? Because you cannot have this guy thrashing around for the next few years, doing what he's doing, lost the trust of many people in the nation, lost credibility, gleefully talking about trade deals. Fine, you know, you've got negotiators who can set them up. Pay attention to your own people. You haven't done that, it would seem. But no, it's probably too late for that. Labour, you need to find somebody else as soon as possible. You need to do a U-turn in terms of your leadership. For the moment, from me, bye for now.